My mother-in-law handed me a glass with a smile that was just a little too sweet, said it was a special gift for her favorite son-in-law. My wife just watched, silently. I thanked her and set the glass on the table without taking a sip. That night was supposed to be just another family dinner, but something told me I wasn't a guest. I was the target. And in that moment, I understood, when betrayal smiles at you, silence becomes the only form of justice. My name is Brandon Ellis. I'm 32 years old and a chef in Santa Fe, New Mexico. I built a small restaurant. Nothing flashy, but full of soul. I work with local, seasonal ingredients, focusing on food as an experience, not just fuel. I was never drawn to the shine of big cities or the ego of awards. My success came through word of mouth, consistency, and honesty with everyone who sat at my table. But I quickly learned that, for certain families, integrity means nothing next to a fat bank account. Especially when you marry the daughter of someone who's always eaten off porcelain but never washed a single dish. Susan, my mother-in-law, was the picture of forced elegance. She said everything with a smile on her lips and judgment in her eyes. Her husband, Albert, was more direct. He saw life as a spreadsheet where only things that turn a profit deserve respect. "Do you work with food or with art?" he once asked me. And he wasn't curious. He was mocking me. To them, my profession was a whim, something temporary like an internship before real life began. Emily, my wife, noticed it all. She defended me at first, but later, well, things changed. In the early days of our marriage, dinners with her family were uncomfortable but manageable. I smiled, answered politely, and came home breathing a little easier. But over time, something began to shift. Emily started repeating certain phrases her mother used. "Don't you think you work too much? Wouldn't something more stable be better?" She said it with love, but it felt like hearing Susan speak through her. The space we had built together started being slowly invaded, inch by inch. And like any subtle invasion, by the time you realize it's happening, there's nowhere left to retreat. The breaking point didn't come as a scream. It came in silence. Emily began spending more time at her parents' house than with me. "She's helping with the club preparations," they'd say. I tried to believe it, tried to convince myself it was just a phase, but the critiques of my work started to show up even in casual conversations. "Are you really going to keep up with this crazy schedule of dinners and events? Wouldn't you be more respected if you opened something in Denver?" Even her friends began looking at me with a mix of pity and doubt, like I was the weak link, the misfit, the problem. Still, I kept trying. I changed the restaurant staff to free up more time at home, cut out holiday events, postponed culinary trips that could have helped me grow. I wanted to show I was all in, but every gesture was met with polite indifference. Susan kept treating me like some reckless artist, and Emily, more silent each day, more absent. I didn't have a partner anymore. I had a bystander, sitting on the fence. And when you feel like you're fighting alone, even love starts to feel like a debt. That's the tension I walked into when I got the invitation to Susan's birthday dinner. I'd just gotten back from Austin, where I took part in an incredible culinary immersion. I came home exhausted, hoping to rest, but Emily insisted, "It's important to her, Brandon." And like any well-laid trap, the tone was sweet, the intentions smiling, and the scent of danger impossible to detect. That dinner felt like just another polite family event, but in truth, it was the perfect stage for someone who wanted to take me down without raising their voice. And that night, something was put on the table, but it wasn't food. Susan's birthday dinner felt more elaborate than usual, silverware that only came out on special occasions, background music at the perfect volume, and dishes that, according to her, were prepared with professional help. I'd been to other dinners at that house before, but I had never felt what I felt that night. There was a tension hidden beneath the polite manners. This wasn't just a celebration. It was a performance. And like any play, some roles were well rehearsed, others not so much. Susan greeted me with exaggerated enthusiasm, the kind that tries to mask discomfort with over-the-top warmth. She hugged me, smiled, complimented my shirt, something she had never done before. Even Albert, my father-in-law, was quieter than usual, as if trying to avoid any friction. But the strangest moment came right after. "I prepared something special for you, Brandon," she said, handing me a glass with a unique drink, garnished with fresh mint and a slice of lime. "I know you like these exotic things," she added. That threw me off. Susan never cared about my preferences. In fact, she made a point of ignoring them. I smiled and thanked her, but didn't take a sip. I just watched. The smell was off, slightly sweet, almost artificial. I glanced at Emily discreetly. She looked away. My gut told me not to trust it. I set the glass down on the table like I was simply distracted by the conversation. Susan seemed to notice but kept up the act. She continued mingling, serving the other guests, laughing a bit too loudly. But for me, it was already clear. Something was off. It wasn't the drink. It was the whole setup, the atmosphere, the intentions behind the sudden kindness. During dinner, Susan made a point to keep me in the spotlight. "Brandon, you have to tell that story from the Austin Festival. How's your restaurant going? Have you thought about expanding?" All with a tone of interest, almost maternal. But I recognized that tone. It's the same one people use with children when they're about to be scolded but want to soften the blow. Albert, sitting next to her, just ate and mumbled generic comments. The man who used to criticize everything I did now seemed sedated. And Emily, silent, more invisible with each passing minute. It wasn't until the end of the night that it started to click. Susan insisted I take a slice of cake home. "Made with ingredients you'll absolutely love." That line kept echoing in my head on the drive back. Everything about that dinner seemed meticulously planned, and not to celebrate, but to test me, observe me, or worse, to provoke a mistake, an emotional reaction. That's when it hit me. I wasn't dealing with someone who wanted me out. I was dealing with someone who wanted me to look unworthy of staying. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the kitchen, the slice of cake still in the bag, staring into nothing. I had no hard evidence, but I had the feeling, and sometimes that's stronger than proof. On the surface, nothing had happened, but inside, something had broken. The trust was gone. From that point on, I had to move differently, quietly, slowly, but with full awareness that that family, that marriage, wasn't what it pretended to be. The morning after the dinner, I woke up with that uneasy feeling, like some part of me was trying to warn me about something my mind hadn't fully grasped yet. Emily was sleeping beside me, motionless, and for a second I wanted to believe it was all just overthinking. But then I remembered the glass, the strange smell, Susan's stare, Albert's silence. The memory didn't come as a clear scene. It came as a weight, and deep down I knew I had crossed an invisible line. From that point on, I couldn't pretend things were normal anymore. I didn't go to work that day. I sent a message to my sous chef and asked him to handle lunch service on his own. I stayed home, sitting in the office, staring into space. On the desk were a few receipts, my tablet, and the business card of a tax attorney who had dined at my restaurant a few months back. I remembered his name because at that dinner, Susan casually said, "A lot of people regret opening a business in their own name." It might sound random, but in that moment things started to click. Maybe this wasn't just about humiliating me. Maybe it was about tearing down everything I'd built. I opened an old folder with all the restaurant documents, contracts, supplier records, licenses. I've never been paranoid, but I've always been organized. And for the first time I started looking at it all from a new angle. What if the threat wasn't emotional? What if it was institutional? What if someone was planning to argue that my business was unstable, that I couldn't provide for a family? What if they were laying the groundwork for something bigger, like a calculated divorce? It might sound like a stretch, until you start lining up the silences, the glances, the coincidences. I spent the week writing down everything that felt off. I created a file just for that. Small observations. Emily's calls ending too quickly, Tuesday meetings with her mother that never existed before, changes in the tone of our conversations. It wasn't paranoia. It was mapping. I started logging times, texts, even days Susan came to our house. all discreet, all silent. There was no room left for naivete. Not when you start realizing you're being tested. On Thursday, I went to the office of the lawyer whose card I'd kept. I told him I needed to review contracts and protect my business. At first, he looked at me with mild confusion. Then he got it. It's not what you think they've done. It's what they might be planning to do, right? I nodded. He gave me guidance on how to safeguard my assets, formalize decisions for the restaurant, and revisit dissolution clauses. I went back home with a folder full of paperwork, and a truth that hurt. I was no longer in a marriage. I was in a chess match. That night, Emily asked why I was so quiet. I said I was tired, but she looked at me for a few seconds longer than usual. Maybe she sensed something had shifted. She didn't ask anything else, and I didn't offer. For the first time, I had something Susan hadn't anticipated. Active silence. She could control narratives, manipulate situations, but she couldn't predict how coldly I would respond. And in the world of people like her, that was more dangerous than any outburst. I found the first real clue by accident. I was going through my work email when I noticed something odd, a request to change the tax address associated with my restaurant, sent by an accounting firm I'd never hired. The notification had been filtered as spam, but there it was, my business ID linked to a new residential address, Emily's parents' house. My whole body went cold. That wasn't a mistake. It was a subtle attempt to reposition my business without my consent. I immediately called my trusted accountant and asked for a full audit of the past 6 months. While I waited, I went back to my notes. I started cross-referencing dates, names, and situations. What once seemed like coincidences was now forming a pattern. Meetings between Emily and Susan on days when financial activity had occurred. Bank account changes made under the pretense of simplifying payments. Even a request for a new password from the Federal Revenue Portal, all tied to my personal ID. Someone was trying to dismantle my foundation, piece by piece. By Friday afternoon, the accountant got back to me. His voice was flat, tense. "Brandon, you need to come in. There are transactions here that don't make sense." When I got to his office, he opened a report and pointed out several failed attempts to register digital powers of attorney, all denied due to a lack of my confirmation. But the most alarming part was the trail left by someone trying to access my revenue data through the bank system. It was someone who knew too much, someone close, and the only person who had direct access to those passwords, besides me, was Emily. I couldn't even drive afterward. I just sat in my car in the parking lot for almost an hour, staring at the steering wheel. Emotional betrayal is devastating, but institutional betrayal, that strips you of your identity. I wasn't just dealing with family disdain anymore. I was facing an operation, a plan calmly orchestrated, likely by more than one person. Susan didn't just want to throw me off balance, she wanted to delegitimize me. And if she succeeded, Emily would have the perfect excuse to end the marriage guilt-free. I'd be the unstable one, the irresponsible husband who couldn't even keep his own name clean. At that point, all the pain turned into focus. I knew I couldn't confront them, not yet. Not without something undeniable, so I began moving with precision. I hired a cybersecurity expert to trace the unauthorized access, updated all my passwords officially, and created a physical folder with notarized copies of every document. The lawyer I had consulted earlier became part of my daily life. For every step they took, I moved one ahead, quietly, and each silent step I took built another wall between me and their theater. The hardest part was living with Emily like nothing was happening. She carried on with her routines, gym, meetings, dinners with her mother. Sometimes she'd try to make small talk like everything was fine, and maybe for her it was. Maybe she thought her plan was working. But I was no longer the man who would bend just to keep the peace. I was the man waiting for the right moment, because I wasn't looking for reconciliation anymore. I was looking for justice. And when it came, it wouldn't be loud. It would be precise, irrefutable, final. The first move I made was quiet but precise. I filed for a temporary freeze on any registration changes tied to my name and my business. I also submitted a legal request for a full audit of all accounting activity from the last quarter. I didn't tell anyone, not even my lawyer included full details in the filing just to avoid leaks. I wanted everything to fall at once when it did. Silence had protected me up to that point. Now, it would be my strongest weapon. The following week, I scheduled a meeting with the manager of the bank where I kept the business account. I brought documents, screenshots, reports. He was surprised by the level of detail, and even more by the unauthorized login attempts coming from a residential IP in Santa Fe. I requested that every future transaction require dual personal authentication, including in-person verification. In other words, from that point on, no one would touch my money without looking me in the eye. It was the beginning of reclaiming the ground they tried to take without warning. That Saturday, I made a point of having lunch with Emily. I chose a neutral restaurant, outdoor seating, a casual couple setting. She looked uneasy, like she knew something was about to happen. I didn't say much, talked about work, travel, even the weather. But at the end, I handed her an envelope with notarized copies of the fraud attempt records. No accusations. Just one sentence. If you want to talk about this, I'll be at home. But if you'd rather choose silence, I'm ready to follow my own path too. Emily froze. She didn't cry, didn't yell, didn't deny. She just took the envelope and lowered her eyes. I paid the bill and left. I let the weight of the decision fall on her. When I got home, I reviewed the documents one last time and signed the retroactive request for asset separation. It was a calculated move. If she wanted to stay with me, she'd have to give up control. If she didn't, the process was already ready. I wasn't trying to save what we had anymore. I was protecting who I was. On Monday, my lawyer filed the formal request with the notary's office. That same day, the financial audit confirmed the fraud attempt and traced the access to the same IP we'd already identified. That opened the door for a legal case backed by hard evidence, not just suspicions. I didn't need to scream or make a scene. I just let the facts fall into place like pieces on a board I now controlled. Susan stopped coming to our house. Albert went quiet too. For the first time, the game stopped, because they knew the response I gave was the only one that couldn't be challenged. The most curious part? There was no phone call, no message, no attempt to explain. Maybe because they knew there was no room left for that. Truth, when properly documented, leaves no space for excuses. And the most ironic part of all was watching how the same family that tried to dismantle me in silence now had to live with the silence they'd sown. I didn't expose them. I didn't disrespect them. I just stopped them. With method, with clarity, and with something they never knew how to handle. Justice delivered without ever losing dignity. The days that followed were filled with complete silence. Not because of lack of time, but because no one even tried. Susan disappeared. No dinner invitations, no just dropping by visits, no passive-aggressive comments in the family group chats. Albert, who used to send me finance and politics videos every week, went quiet. And Emily, well, she started sleeping on the other side of the bed. Literally. As if physical distance was the only thing she still had control over. She never asked me anything about the documents. And I never pushed the conversation. Her silence said more than any excuse ever could. In the third week, I found a box of my things neatly packed in the living room. It wasn't an explicit request. It was a silent suggestion. As if she were saying, make it easier. But I didn't move. I just picked up the phone, scheduled the moving company through my lawyer for the next day, and left for work like always. That afternoon, I left the keys on the kitchen counter along with an envelope containing all the finalized legal terms. No letter, no explanation. She knew. And deep down, maybe she was waiting for it. People who manipulate until the very end always underestimate the strength of someone who resists in silence. The next day, she sent one single message. You could have at least let me explain. I stared at the screen for a while, but I didn't reply. Because explanations only exist when there's still trust. And by then, all that was left was calculation. not love. I deleted the message, not out of anger, but to cleanse. My silence in that moment wasn't revenge, it was recovery. I needed to hear myself again, after months of trying to fit into a story that was never mine. And to do that, I couldn't keep watching the final chapters of something that should have ended long ago. Some friends asked why I didn't try harder, talk things out, fix it. But what they didn't understand, and maybe never will, is that some battles can't be won by talking. They're won by walking away. Protecting your own sanity is a kind of victory too. And sometimes the deepest justice isn't watching the other person pay. It's simply freeing yourself from playing the defendant in a story made up by someone too scared to face their own mediocrity. The hardest part, after everything, was reorganizing my emotions. Because it's not just about cutting ties. It's about learning to live without all the noise you'd gotten used to hearing every day. The judgment, the forced silences, the concerns disguised as criticism. For a while, all of that echoed. But with time, and with the right kind of silence, even echoes fade, and what's left is space to rebuild. Today, I look back with a kind of calm that isn't triumphant. It's just the relief of having stopped trying to be accepted in a place where I was only ever tolerated. I didn't need to shout. I didn't need to prove anything to anyone. I just needed to stand my ground, choose my integrity, and never look back. After the separation, I moved into a small apartment in downtown Santa Fe. Nothing fancy, but it had natural light, silence, and just enough space to start cooking again, just for the joy of it. I brought very little with me, a few cookbooks, my spice collection, and one photograph, taken by a customer on a day when the restaurant was packed, and I was genuinely happy. It wasn't nostalgia. It was just a reminder that joy can return, if you know how to start over the right way. I began treating my mornings like tending a garden, with patience, discipline, and respect for time. I started walking again before sunrise, something I hadn't done in years. I found a small local cafe where no one knows who I am, and that now feels like a relief. Little by little, I started feeling like my name fit me again. No more pleasing anyone, no more measuring my words, no more walking on eggshells. Manipulation, when it becomes routine, destroys your inner compass, and it takes time before you can trust your own steps again. One day, I got a message from a former employee at the restaurant. She said she'd heard rumors that someone was trying to smear my name and wanted me to know that if I needed a statement, I could count on her. That touched me in a strange way, not because of the accusation, but because of her loyalty. I replied with a simple, "Thank you," and in that moment I realized that what I had built, even in silence, had taken root deeper than anything Susan or Emily could ever tear down. Sometimes the truest justice doesn't come from court. It comes from the people you impacted without even realizing it. These days, I'm in no rush to start a new relationship. Not out of fear, but because I've learned the value of being whole before sharing myself with someone else. Time has shown me that some betrayals don't deserve revenge. They deserve to be forgotten. That some victories need no spotlight, no applause. And that real rebirth begins the moment you stop justifying your existence to people who never really saw you. I didn't win a war. I simply stopped participating in one. I still drive past Susan's house sometimes, when the route happens to take me that way. But now I don't even feel anger. Just the certainty that that place no longer holds any power over me. The silence that once suffocated me is now my ally. It gives me focus, clarity, and most of all, peace. And if someone ever asks how I managed to move on after everything, maybe I'll just say this: because I chose myself. And for the first time in a long time, no one had the power to make me doubt that. If you asked me what I learned most from all this, I'd say it was about boundaries, about how betrayal, manipulation, and forced silence don't just teach you about others, they teach you about yourself. I learned that a peaceful life is worth more than any family approval. That the wife who walks away in silence reveals more about herself than about you. And that justice, when it arrives at the right time, doesn't need to be cruel. It just needs to be final. What started with a suspicious glass and a fake smile ended with something much greater. My reconstruction. In the end, it wasn't the drink in the glass that left the biggest mark. It was the way they tried to silence who I was, little by little, masking manipulation as concern. Betrayal doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers. It comes wrapped in rehearsed compliments, conditional favors, and smiles that hide intentions. The justice I found wasn't about defeating anyone. It was about no longer accepting less than I deserve. I learned that you don't need to destroy someone to break free. You just have to stop letting yourself be held. And for someone who's ever been diminished, that's the greatest victory. If you made it this far, truly, thank you. Maybe this story hit a nerve for you too. Maybe you know someone who's been through something similar. If you feel like it, share your thoughts in the comments. Tell your story. Say what hurt, what set you free, or even what you'd do differently. That's what this space is for, so we can stop carrying certain wounds in silence. Sometimes just saying it out loud is the first step to healing. And you can be sure, someone out there will feel a little less alone because of it. And if stories like this speak to you, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. There's still so much more for us to share here, because every story like this is more than just content. It's a mirror. And maybe, somewhere between one memory and the next, you'll find the turning point in your own story.